So I want to finish off the final video in this series about is davening too long. Again, I love to daven long, but we have to understand that not everybody is able to daven long. Not everybody. Now, some people can say the whole davening. I know if I'm in a big rush, I can say the whole davening without skipping anything in like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, from Adon Olam to Adon Olam, beginning to end, even saying, quickly looking over, Psach Liyot, Tefillah, Kedem Tefillah, just really super, super fast. Is that the right way to daven? No. Shulchan Aruch is clear that it's better to say less with more kavanah than to say more with less kavanah. But obviously it's better, a wonderful thing to say a lot with more kavanah. But not everyone is able to do that, meaning you have to be realistic. So, yes, when you have extra time, it would be better, a lot of places, when it's a legal holiday and many people don't have to go to work, they daven later. And it would be nicer than if instead of davening later, they would start the same time, but end later, because they have, more time. We have to be realistic, and this is throughout the poskim. For example, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, he says that it's better for a minyan to start Shmona Esrei at the Netzach Hama Vasikin, then and to skip Tachanun, then to start the Shmona Esrei before Vasikin and to say Tachanun. So why can't you start at? The question would be, so why is he giving this psak? Why can't you start Shemona Esrei at Vasikin and also say Tachanun? Well, it's because people have to go to work. So there's understanding that people have to go to work, and that davening doesn't get in the way of going to work, but you have to fit it in your schedule. You have to fit davening into your schedule and work into your schedule. But of course, on days you don't have to work, you can daven longer. And you should daven longer, that's why Shabbos, the davening is longer. That's why. And of course, really, even though there's been discussion both ways on this, but really, a koilinger man, someone who's learning all day, should daven long. I don't mean necessarily that Shacharis on a weekday should take 3 hours, but maybe it should take an hour instead of 40 minutes. Some people do daven for 3 hours. It depends, and that would also depend on the kollel. Some,
Abraham, what are you doing?
That's their approach. Some are more for davening, some are more for learning. Each is different. Now, that being said, so I'm not saying it's wrong people who daven longer, but also we shouldn't look down on people who daven shorter. I remember I was Rav in Richmond, and sometimes I would go to the minyan in the yeshiva, and sometimes I go to the minyan in another shul, which was officially a joint minyan with our shul, but whatever, is a whole, neither here, not to talk, open up old wounds. But I remember a Ben Torah, a very ehrlich younger man. He was a Magid Shir he was a Melamed in the day school. I saw him regularly. Usually he would daven in the yeshiva if he's able to, but he wasn't always able to. Sometimes he would have to daven in the town shul, and they daven pretty quick, as did the yeshiva, incidentally. And I saw he would say just Baruch Shamar Ashrei Nishtabach, but he said it with very slowly, and I would assume with kavana. Whereas in the shul they say everything but quickly, and the time it took for him to say Baruch Shamar Ashrei Nishtabach is the time it took for them to say the whole Pesukah de Zimra. And to be honest, according to Shulchan Aruch, he's right. Again, everybody has their own thing. Now, we discussed in the previous videos about skipping things that are in the Siddur, which is not really that controversial. But what about, then we got into shortening the Birkus Kriya Shema, or also the halacha is actually, there's a psak from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I'm not saying it's the only approach in halacha, but it's certainly a valid one. Excuse me. If you said Kriya Shema already before davening, and you're going to miss the Shemona Esrei, you could say the Birkus Kriya Shema and just say Shema Yisrael, and maybe the last pasuk, Hashem Elokeichem Emes, with the whole pasuk, and continue with the Birkus Kriya Shema, and that's what Rabbi Shlomo Zalman suggests, so that you should be up to to say the Shemona Esrei together with the Tzibur as the halacha. Of course, there's different approaches to that. What does it mean, Tefillah B'Tzibur? You could start with the Chazan by the Chesaris Hashatz. Some say, as long as you start before the last person who started together the Chazan finishes the first bracha. Some say, even as long as you start the Shemona Esrei while someone is still davening Shemona Esrei, that's considered Tefillah B'Tzibur. There's different opinions what it means Tefillah B'Tzibur throughout different poskim, and Ve'en Kan Mokum Laharich. But that shows, but the issue is we have a minhag that you should say the Kriya Shema while we're in Tefillin. What if you said it before you put on Tefillin, which is an issue of, he's made Eid Sheker Ba'atzma, it's a whole question with that, whether or not you're allowed to do that. But let's say that's what you did, and then you should say the Kriya Shema again before you take off the Tefillin. Like we do, people who put on Rebbeinu Tam Tefillin, they say again the Kriya Shema, and the other portions are in the Tefillin, wearing the Rebbeinu Tam Tefillin. Is it really necessary? No, and I've seen very, very early people that they would just, they were in a rush, they put on the Rebbeinu Tam Tefillin, and they just said the pasuk Shema Yisrael, and not the whole thing, and that was sufficient. Someone who I know is very nizer, who davens long every day, who, on a regular day, he's part of a kehillah where they daven shachris, I don't know, for 2 or 3 hours every day. They meditate a lot. There's a different type of kehillah, not mainstream, But anyway, that's not for everyone. Again, what about the Shemona Esrei itself? Can we cut down the actual Shemona Esrei? And we have to say Me'ikar Adin, yes. In fact, there were those who have said that we have too many words in our Shemona Esrei. The Arizal says that each bracha is supposed to have a certain amount of words, and in many ways Nusach Ashkenaz is more accurate and more correct than many of the versions of Nusach Sfard, and we have various versions of Nusach Sfard like Munkach and others, and the Barditchever Siddur that's used, the Satmar Rebbe's daven from that, the Tefillah Yeshar in Boston, they daven from that. Again, that's not what I use. I say a lot more words. I like to say more words, and it's a deficiency in me. I should really be saying like that, but you're allowed to add precautions within each bracha of the Shemona Esrei, and I feel that that's a din. Also, sometimes, like the word avdecha in the Yerushalayim Ircha, that Nusach Sfard adds the word v'chisi David avdecha. It's understood to be perish of milas. It's understood to be an explanation of which David we're speaking of. We're speaking of David avdecha, that King David, your servant, and that's why that they say that that's not really. And the same thing with a lot of the other additions that different kehillas have to add into the Shemona Esrei, and even bakoshes that are allowed to be added. But Me'ikar Adin, the main thing is how the brachas end. Even though with Birkas Aminim, there's also different versions of the Birkas Aminim of how it ends. The Sfardim have a different version than the Ashkenazim. Most Hasidim go like the Ashkenazim, but some have a little bit of a mix, whether the word minim belongs in there and so forth. But the main thing is that you have these 19 statements, and each one ends with bracha to Hashem, and then some statement that's related to this bracha and should begin with some aspect of the bracha. So a friend of mine, he put together a siddur that has the absolute condensed version of the Shemoneh Esrei with all 19 brachas intact, not doing less than 19 brachas, because we have to say 100 brachas a day, and you're already saying, Shemoneh Esrei 3 times a day, and all the other brachas, generally, and sometimes they say answering Amen, there's different opinions, but you get your 100 brachas. It's a takana from David HaMelech to say 100 brachas a day. And there's other reasons. Chazal, they were masakin that we have these 19 brachas. However, Chazal also said that someone who is unable to say, who's not familiar with the 19 brachas, could say Me'ein Shemoneh Esrei. And we have Tefillah Havinenu, which is that you say the first 3 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei, 1 bracha in the middle, similarly like we do on Shabbos and Yontiv and so forth, that we have only 7 brachas in the Amidah. One fulfills his obligation, even on a weekday, by saying 3 brachas at the beginning, 1 bracha in the middle, and 3 brachas at the end. For those who are looking for that in English, if you look in the Birnbaum Siddur, weekday or complete Siddur, after the weekday Shachar Amidah, it has that bracha Havinenu, as is brought down in Chazal, that encapsulates the other brachas all into one. Those other 13 brachas become 1 bracha, and it ends with Shemaya Tefillah. But before saying that, as is noted in the notes, you have to say the first 3 brachas and the last 3 brachas. There's a whole issue about saying that in the winter when we say V'sein Talamater. I would imagine you could probably just add the words V'sein Talamater. The problem with that is the Gemara says that a curse goes on anyone who says Tfilas Havinenu. It is not a thing that Chazal were really strongly suggesting. It was mainly for in the old days when people didn't have written Siddurim, and so they prayed by heart, and many people were unable to memorize the whole Shemoneh Esrei, and so they memorized an abbreviated form. However, again, when we're dealing with B'shas Chak, certainly the halacha allows it. And so when the Gemara says it, when it says there's a curse on anyone who says the Tfilas Havinenu, it's speaking about if they say it all the time when it's unnecessary. But if it's necessary, a real Shas Chak, there's a question whether or not it should be said the way it's written in the Chazal, the way we see it in some Siddurim, or whether each bracha should start off with those 2 words that correspond to that bracha. There's 2 or 3 words that correspond to each bracha, and then end off with bracha to Hashem, chonei nadas, bracha to Hashem, harotze b'shuva, bracha to Hashem, chanan amar b'l'sloyach, and actually make 19 brachas out of this Tfilas Havinenu. If one does that, I would say for sure they've done nothing wrong. And really, to be honest, even they could do that all the time, technically, and there would be nothing wrong with that. But to be totally honest, if we're dealing with someone who's struggling with the idea of davening 3 times a day, they're struggling with maintaining this devotion. They're not so frum. They might not daven 3 times a day, but they're considering doing it. I think it's wise, and some Rabbanim do it, to suggest for certain people, and you have to know each person where they're holding, that even the Shemoneh Esrei, you could say the Tfilas Havinenu. Some people could say the whole thing in 30 seconds. And then you fulfilled your obligation to pray 3 times a day by saying the Tfilas Havinenu. So technically, what you could do, you say the morning brachas. You could say, if you want to do the bare minimum, what you have to do, you could say morning brachas, Baruch Shamar, even a shortened version of Baruch Shamar. Ideally to say Ashrei, or if you have to say Ashrei later, just to say one pasuk like P'seichas Yidecha. Hold on, I'm almost done. And then you say Yishtabach. You could say an abbreviated form of the Birkas Kriya Shema, before and after with the Kriya Shema. And if need be, you could say the Kriya Shema later, if you're in a rush. Especially, if you know Ashrei and Kriya Shema by heart, so you could just say part of the Kriya Shema and then say the whole Kriya Shema either earlier or later at another time, as long as it's before Sof Zman Kriya Shema. And then the Bracha Gal Yisrael, and then even to say Tfilas Havinenu, or for sure to say an abbreviated Shemona Esrei, Ashrei Nuvelatzion, and then you're good. Mincha, Ashrei, and the abbreviated Shemona Esrei, or the full Shemona Esrei in abbreviated form, whatever. And then Marav again, the brachas of the Kriya Shema. Maybe you're davening early, it's not even time to say Kriya Shema yet. So you could just say the beginning of Kriya Shema, and then the brachas, you could skip Baruch Hashem, Le'olam Amen V'Amen, that the Ashkenazim say in Chutz La'aretz, technically, and then again the Shemona Esrei, for sure by Marav, you could say abbreviated Shemona Esrei because Tfilas Arvis Rishus. Again, when we say Tfilas Arvis Rishus, though, even though I didn't say this before, a lot of people mistaken. They think that Marav is optional, even though it's been accepted as a chayva. If I'm saying for people who are struggling, people who are just starting to daven, everyone agrees that the brachas of the Kriya Shema and the Kriya Shema are obligatory. Well, you could say the brachas a little early. Kriya Shema has to say when it's really night. But the Shemona Esrei is what's optional, the nighttime Shemona Esrei. Because it's optional, you can also say it early. And most places do say it technically early. And then you fulfill your obligation. A friend of mine, he said he's a ger. And he said when he was a Christian and he didn't belong to a church that had a set liturgy, and so he would fast and pray for hours and hours and never feel that he did enough. It's interesting because you would think Christianity, they say that you're saved just by belief, you don't need to pray. But he knew instinctively that he's supposed to pray, but he always felt inadequate. He always felt like he didn't fulfill his obligation. And he says now that he's a Jew, he's a Talmid Chacham, he knows what he has to. He's the one who made this shortened siddur. He knows what his obligation is, and he doesn't obsess over prayer anymore. He does what he has to do, and that's it. And he doesn't have to do anymore. And the fact of the matter is, fulfilling the basic requirements that we have according to halacha, not extra minhagim, but the basic things that are required of us by halacha, is a tremendous accomplishment in this day and age. That we're in such a low level spiritually, the Jewish community, and how many Jews are so far from Judaism and are the opposite of Judaism. Of course, we have to have respect for people who daven everything that's in the siddur. And that's a wonderful and good thing to do. And that's a higher level. But that's not for everybody. And for some people, their higher level is to say less. Because sometimes saying more, tefasta murmur le tefasta. You're doing too much, you wind up with nothing. So, someone wants to be a chassid, someone wants to be a Kabbalist. Yeah, when I'm done. Even Kabbalistically, sometimes less is more. If you really study Kabbalah, if you really study Chassidus, if you really understand what it's all about, sometimes less is more. So everyone has to know where they are. It's good to have hadracha, to have someone who's knowledgeable, who you could talk to about these things and know what's right for you. But also you have to be a mensch for yourself and know and understand halacha yourself. Become a Talmid Chacham, learn Torah, learn halacha, know what's really about, and make educated decisions. Now the thing is, if you've been doing more than halacha requires, you're obligated min hastam to continue to do whatever you've been doing, or to seek out hataras nadarim. Now the minhag is we make hataras nadarim before Rosh Hashanah anyway, and it's also mistama lekana la'aba, but still one should seek out to be mater neder kehalacha if one wants to start doing less, although maybe maker din it's not necessary because it's not the halacha, and there's many other reasons why it's not necessary, but it might be an erlicha thing to do, even if it's not obligatory to halacha. If one, for whatever reason, but the thing is, part of it is, of course, the reason why a person might want to do this is because his situation has changed, or maybe it's just temporary. If it's just temporary, then it doesn't need, and Mikra din one doesn't need to make a Taras Nadarim. But Mistama, one should. Another question is benching. Just while we're on this subject, should we say the whole benching, or should we say an abbreviated benching like the Rambam has? You know, the Ben Ish Chai was a big makubal, and he said that the Rambam's version of benching, which is much shorter, it's about the same size as Alamichya, but it has 4 brachas. He said women and children should be encouraged to say that. But the thing is, some poskim say even men should be encouraged to say it. Why? Well, let's think about it this way. You're supposed to say 100 brachas a day. A lot of people, one of the, I remember Rabbi Olavsky said, there's a frum phobia. I don't want to wash. Then I have to bench. When I mean don't want to wash, means to wash and make a motzi, meaning not to wash your hands in the morning, and wash your hands when they're dirty, but before eating bread, it's a halachi wash. You make a bracha and you make a motzi, and then after you have to bench. And people are like, I don't want to wash. But the thing is, it's probably better. Now, instead of saying 2 brachas, you're going to say a mezonus before. Well, maybe 3 or 4 brachas. Maybe you just make a mezonus and a shahakol. Maybe a ha'etz, a hadama, a chveis. I don't know. It depends what you're eating. So let's say you have a mezonus sandwich. Now the thing is, sometimes you're eating in your car. You don't have where to wash. That's a different thing when you're traveling. You don't have the wherewithal to go and wash and to wash. Also machronim, where to put them on. There's different issues, and there are legitimate reasons not to wash and to seek out a mezonus sandwich or something. But even the mezonus sandwich really is supposed to wash mikra din, but it's a whole different thing. But let's say you're stuck, you make the mezonus, and then let's say there's a pickle in the sandwich, you make adama, and then the meat, you make a shahakol, so that's 3 brachas, and then you make alamichya and brain nefashos, so that's 5 brachas. And if you would have made a motzi, so you make the 4 brachas on the benching and the hamotzi and the netilas yadayim, so it's 6 brachas. So even to say 6 brachas over 5 brachas, it's still 1 more bracha. So the question is, so should we say the whole benching? If you're able to and you have kavanah and everything, you should, and you don't have a problem with it. But some people are scared to wash because they don't want to bench. But maybe if they saw benching doesn't have to be so long, you don't have to say all the harachmans.